of the 1800s, there was a bunch, and early 1900s, there was or the 20th century, there was a series of world fairs. Chicago and New York. I don't know if it was one in New York. Yeah, I guess there was. Chicago being the most famous, but San Francisco had one.
St. Louis had one. Philadelphia had one. Nashville had one. They're all over. All over.
And so what John Levy, and I'm going to put, John Levy has a YouTube site, and I'll put a link up on it. He is, he points out that how crazy it is to build these world fairs, incredibly ornate buildings, incredibly intricate architecture, and then, just for the summer, or whatever year that is, and then they just tear it down. And how it kind of completely insane the whole thing is, and it is insane, actually, especially because they're so incredible. These world fairs were amazing. Just Google in the pictures of them. But Levy is saying, and this is where it gets really interesting, is that this stuff was already there, and that the world fairs were kind of used as a cover-up to make it look like we did it. And then, because we really couldn't understand what we were looking at anyway, we tore most of it down because they were using a kind of a resonance technology, you might say, that we don't use because we just hit things and break them and use electricity. But he also points out the fact that I believe it was the Chicago World's Fair, which is where Tesla was first lit it up with AC power, and all of the towers and everything that they built on these buildings sort of look a little bit like a Tesla tower. So you wonder if Tesla didn't see some of this stuff and get a lot of ideas from it.
Yeah, that's what it feels like. So I've had some people, correspond with me around this idea that Tesla was piggybacking on that technology. Well, apparently he was already into it when he was living in Europe and was pretty well versed with it. When he got to the States, he was just, working on it and building it out and trying to do it at a kind of a larger scale. So it certainly seems like Tesla was tapping into the Tartarian technology of pulling electricity out of the ether. That's what they were doing.
Yeah, which is exactly what the pyramid in Great at Giza was also doing. It was generating electricity, then shooting it up into the ionosphere, where anyone could use it if you had a receiver. And so this technology has been around for a long time, and what the contention is, so if you're getting confused, is that this Tartarian empire was nearly worldwide, and that they had a certain kind of architecture that they built their buildings with using. And we can find that architecture in Japan, in China, in Russia, in Europe, and if he's right, in San Francisco and Chicago and a lot of other places.
So I just pulled up a web page. This is just results for some of these, some of the buildings that share a ton of similarities. And before we dive into some of these things, there were a couple of things about the Parthenon that were really interesting.
Yeah.
One of the things that you look at are pictures from this National World's Fair. There are no pictures of them building any of these buildings in the World's Fair. You never see them. Like there was this one picture of scaffolding that was connected to the Parthenon, but they weren't building it. They were like doing some repair or something. It wasn't, there are no pictures of them building any of this stuff. And then you go in and the ceilings are they're huge. I mean, this place is enormous. Like, who builds a building this big and why? Well, clearly, I think the answer is that it's for people that are a lot taller than you and I. But I think that's the big answer right there. The other thing that really grabbed me, besides the fact that they have an enormous statue of Athena inside this thing, which is really, oh yeah, is that they have these two they're plaster cast, so they're not carved out of marble or anything, but they have these two griffins that are there, and they're kind of guarding this enormous statue of Athena. And the griffin was the symbol for Tartaria. It was on their flag.
That's right.
why did they include these griffins inside of the Parthenon? That's interesting. They're basically telling you, hey, look, this is what this is connected with. If you got eyes to see, you can kind of figure this thing out. So these are some of the buildings that you're referring to. And one of the things that they have in common are these kind of onion domes,
Right.
which you see in a number of them, right? And then
Yep.
and then Levy calls this the Antiquitech, which is where we see these spires coming off these buildings. And the spires are connected with this almost sigil-like kind of antennae, right?
Yeah, and Fulcanelli's book, Mystery of the Cathedrals, he says that the cathedrals were not built for Christian worship. And he says they were actually alchemical machines. And, he was never clear into what he was really saying as far as that. He wants you to go find out, but just saying, that's what he's saying. And so what we're saying is that probably the huge amount of cathedral building in the 1200s was probably done by the Tartarians because it resembles their architecture.
Exactly. And so then we look at the whole story of Rome and Greece and this whole kind of idea that everything started in Egypt and then just went westward as being a false narrative. And if that's the case, then everything needs to be re-examined, including
I would agree with you. This has really made me realize that the history is just completely wrong.
Exactly.
And it's wrong on purpose. And so we get back to this whole idea that the victor writes history, right? And so whoever defeated the Tartarians, and we don't know who that would be, and because it's not really put in any history books, then they would write them out. But here's the problem. We actually know that the great writing out of the Tartarians happened in the 20th century. It happened in the Soviet Union. There was actually a bureau that was assigned by Stalin to write out the Tartarians from everywhere. And this bureau went on for, I think, 40 years, writing out every single, blotting these people and their culture completely out of history. And that's pretty recent. So you have to wonder why the Soviet Union would be so concerned in the 20th century with wiping a people from a long time ago out of history. And the question then becomes, and John Levy asked this question also, as you do, Robert, maybe they got wiped out recently.
Right. So this picture illustrates not just some of the Tartarian architecture, but this idea that there was a mud flood that wound up basically covering up about 2/3 of their structures, and that ultimately they wind up uncovering and finding a lot of this stuff versus actually building it out.
Right.
Yeah. So it's mind blowing. This, I mean, the potential of evaluating the historical narrative around this is mind-blowing and also quite liberating in a lot of ways.
It is. Both you and I lived in San Francisco in our past, and of course, beautiful city, one of the most beautiful cities on earth. And Levy points out that, that how impossible it would be for San Francisco, if you Google image San Francisco 1850, and you look at photographs of San Francisco, it's practically built, and it was only became a city in 1850. But by 1855, there's literally hundreds and hundreds of houses and buildings that are not easy houses and buildings to build. They're ornate. There's 3 cathedrals. Okay, because we know how religious gold miners are, right? You have to have 3 cathedrals.
3 cathedrals, yeah.
Yeah, and where do the Masons? There's 1,500 miles of wilderness to the east of San Francisco at the time. So the wagon trains are moving across the country from St. Louis. How many Masons made the trip to help San Francisco do this build out? And then there's the other thing that Levy points out, which is the one that actually it twisted my noggin so much that I'm still not over it. And that's the fact that if you look at pictures of San Francisco in 1850, so the camera first photograph, I think it was 1835. So by 1850, there were a lot of photographers now. So photography was becoming ubiquitous. That's why it's actually a good year, because people were taking a lot of photographs, because it just gotten a lot easier. The technology had gotten easier. And he points out that if you look at pictures of 1850, 1855 San Francisco, there's nobody there. There's
No,
no horses. There's no
no.
people. You may see one horse, down the road on Market Street. And so that, like, kind of, at that point I went, what? And so then I started in a mad dash of Google imaging Berlin 1850, Moscow 1850, Paris 1850. When I hit Paris 1850, because I've been to Paris quite a number of times in my life. It's besides San Francisco, one of my very favorite cities. And when I Google imaged Paris 1850, I expected to see Les Miserables,
Right.
right? Horse crap everywhere, horses everywhere, poor people, rich people, dirty, filthy conditions. And I go, and there's just like, I can't find a photograph with more than like 15 people in it.
Right.
And I'm like completely blown away that Paris is this huge build out of buildings,
Yeah.
but nobody there.
Nobody
And
there.
I know that sounds incredible, but you guys can do it yourself. You can just Google these towns and you'll find that seeing the big masses of people that you expect to find in the downtown areas of these major European cities and American cities, you don't see. It's